So it's actually very rare for us to preach on the Feast of St. Peter and Paul because it doesn't generally fall on a Sunday. But I was actually very excited to preach today because the set of readings includes two of my most favorite readings. The second reading from the epistle of Paul to Timothy is actually, part of it is actually a quote that I have on the document that I use to track the preaching schedule. And so it's there to remind me of a part of the vocation of what it means to be a priest, particularly the preaching as part of that. The gospel reading is actually one of my favorites. It takes place at the end of John. So this is after, it's the resurrected Christ who's talking to Peter, and it comes at the tail end. We hear this gospel actually every year, usually during the Easter season, a couple Sundays after Easter. And it's always a little bit, a bit of a random chance whether or not I get to preach on the gospel, because we rotate amongst me and Mother Sandy, and sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. And this year Mother Sandy got it. I thought, well, I'll be able to preach on it maybe next year. But I got it today, so I'm beyond excited because I get to preach on two of my most favorite passages. They're my favorite passages for a number of different reasons. There are many layers to them that resonate. But today, in particular, in the Feast of Peter and Paul, the part that most resonates with me for both of these readings, the epistle as well as the gospel, is when they take place in the lives of Peter and Paul and the scope of their story. Because that's important. Because it says a lot about not only their role in the church, but perhaps more importantly, it says a lot about God and how God works in the church and in our lives. On the Feast of St. Peter and Paul, most of, if you look that up online, a lot of what you'll read about is about the great things they've done, how they were instrumental in the founding of the Christian church, their great deeds. And they are these heroic figures, and that is appropriate. However, that can sometimes lead us to the idea that in order to, be a saint, in order to do things for God and for the church, we have to be heroic people. That somehow it is something about them, something about their talent, about their gifts, about who they were innately that allowed them to do what they do. There's a quote that one often hears around the time of ordinations or when someone is discerning. And usually it's fairly common for anyone who is discerning a vocation to have doubts. Am I good enough? Do I have what it takes? Do I know enough? Can I do enough? What am I doing here? And the quote that you'll hear in response to that, and it's a good quote, is when people will say, well, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips those who are called. And generally we say that to reassure those who are discerning a vocation or a next part in life that God is there and will give them what they need for the next step in the journey. And while that's true, and while I think that quote is important, it can lead to a little bit of a misunderstanding. I was raised in America, and so when I hear a quote like God will, equips the called, the first thing that springs to mind is a laundry list of skills. So God will somehow, at some point, give this person the ability to, to preach the word of God well, to be able to speak well in public. God will give this person the ability to organize church committees. God will help this person speak well to when they need to. We're able to write a sermon. We're able to do the Mass. We're able to do all these things that they need to do to fulfill the tasks associated with the vocation. But when I think about Peter and Paul, that's not actually how God works. And when I think of their stories, and when the readings from today where those take place in those stories, it's not at all how God works. It's not about giving people a certain set of skills by which they can then do a job. And it's very clear, based on where these two readings appear in Peter and Paul's life, that the rules by which God plays are not the rules by which people play. And it's not the rules by which businesses play, or what we think of as anything in the sector, in the business sector. Because when God calls Peter and when God calls Paul, it's not after they've achieved some great thing. It's not after a point in their lives where they have suddenly done something amazing that God says, oh, you're brilliant at that. You can preach. I'm going to call you. It's after both of them have hugely made devastating mistakes. And not just mistakes, betrayals of the ultimate sort. The kind of betrayals, the kinds of actions that tear apart relationships. Both Peter and Paul did things which should have gotten them exiled from the Christian community. It should have made God reject them. Peter, who has followed Jesus for 3 years, been at his side, watched the miracles, at the moment of Jesus' greatest need, when one would hope that he would stand up for Jesus and say, no, I know this man, he is a good man. In a courtyard, in a casual conversation with those around him, as Jesus is being put on trial, they say, hey, don't you know that man from Galilee? I think you know him. Peter says, I don't know him. He has no part of Jesus. He denies him completely. He doesn't stand up for him. He doesn't speak the truth. He doesn't say, no, he is a miracle worker. He is a good man. I've watched him do this for years. He says, I don't know him. I don't want to be related to him. He does it not once. He does it 3 times. He gets 3 chances to redeem himself. Asked once, he denies. Well, maybe the second time we ask, he'll redeem himself. Asked the second time, no, he denies Jesus again the second time. 3rd time, you know this man. Again, another chance to speak up for Jesus. He denies him. He doesn't hedge, doesn't even be neutral. He just outrightly denies him. It is the ultimate personal betrayal of someone who loves him. Paul is even worse. We know Paul is the great apostle who goes and preaches to the Gentiles. But before Paul did that, Paul hunted Christians down. Not just participated in the stoning of Stephen, happened to pass by, they're stoning somebody, and he participated, which would be pretty bad in and of itself. Deliberately planned, asked for permission, got permission to hunt Christians down, tie them up, drag them to a different city, and have them executed. Blanket permission to take innocent people, tie them up, and execute them. By rights, the Christian community should have rejected him. He should have nothing to do with any part of the founding of this. God should have said, no, of all the people I will entrust with spreading my word, with spreading the gospel, it cannot be these 2. Someone who, in the heat of the moment when things are hard, will walk away and deny everything. And the second one, who is actively hunting those who love me and who are trying to follow me. This is who God chooses. But God doesn't play by the same rules that people play by. Because God does something radically different. He chooses them. To Peter, we actually hear in today's gospel the offer. After Peter betrays Jesus, while Jesus is on trial, the resurrected Lord comes back and asks Peter, do you love me? And Peter affirms that love 3 times. It's that moment of forgiveness where Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." For Paul, it is on the road to Damascus where he sees the risen Lord and has a moment of understanding. I would also add to that not only the road to Damascus, but what he experiences after, because afterwards, the Christian community takes Paul in. Ananias takes Paul in when he is blind, because Ananias is told by the message of an angel that you will take Paul in and treat him well, and you will help heal him because he is the one God has chosen. And Ananias is not quite sure this is a good idea, but he does it anyway. He takes this person who has been persecuting those who are part of his community, and he takes him in and helps him become part of the community. In both these instances, what both Peter and Paul are able to experience is forgiveness in its purest form. It is compassion in its purest form. More than anybody else, more than many, they understand what it is to experience Christ's forgiveness, what it is to utterly betray the people you love the most, what it is to utterly work for the destruction of the people who will now take you in. And instead of being met with rejection, instead of being met with corresponding hate, they are met with forgiveness, and they are met with compassion, and they are met with love. And because of those experiences, it is those experiences that make them uniquely called to preach the gospel. Because only someone who has experienced true forgiveness, only experienced that level of compassion and that level of love, could understand on a visceral level what it means to follow Christ and what Christ asks us to do. So yes, God does equip those who he calls, not in the way we think though, not in the way we think. For us as the modern day apostles and followers and disciples of Christ, reminds us that what equips us, ourselves, to go forth and preach the gospel and spread the word aren't those things that one would necessarily think. It's not the places where we succeed. It's not the places where we are doing always our best. It can be, but it's also those places that we are most broken. It is those places where we have failed and have understood love because of that failure. It is those places where we have hurt someone and been forgiven. It is those places where we experience the compassion and love of God. And it is from those places that the call for us to go forth and spread the love of God, to spread God's compassion come from. So on this feast day of Peter and Paul, may we remember that we are each called, like Peter and Paul, to go forth and spread the good news. And that calling comes not from some set of skills that we check off a box as if on a job interview, but from our experiences of love, of forgiveness, of compassion. Those times when we were actually the lowest, those are the times when we are called to remember God's compassion, God's love, and spread that love and compassion to others. Blessed be the name of the Lord.